I'm not saying this is criticism, TJ, but I'm just saying is that that's the reality. So he, sometimes I'd see his people cringe a little bit if he got off. It's your responsibility. And no matter what they ask you, of course, answer the question as long as it's reasonable, not crazy or way off the mark.
I was looking to leave Florida, looking for a job in TV journalism. I wrote to every kind of famous TV talk show host. I could think of Michael Kinsley, who was hosting Crossfire, others. And I wrote to Bob Berkowitz, who was the #1 talk show host in prime time on CNBC at the time. He's been an Associated Press reporter, a talk show host. He was CNN's first White House correspondent. He's interviewed everyone from Ronald Reagan to kings and queens around the world.
And it was the predecessor of CNBC. Again, it focused on the stock market, it focused on how to make more money, how to be more successful in business, how to make your small business into a bigger business, things like that. All good.
We're speaking to Bob Berkowitz, a renowned talk show host, journalist, and communications consultant who continues to work and train top leaders of academia, the business world, and the political world.
But in essence, you're an advocate for the audience. You're in a position to ask the questions that maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Who knows? I don't even have any prescription drugs in my body. In fact, my dad, at the end of his life, he was not taking one prescription drug.
My special guest today has seen communication from the highest levels in multiple decades. He's been an Associated Press reporter, a talk show host. He was CNN's first White House correspondent. He's interviewed everyone from Ronald Reagan to kings and queens around the world. He has been a producer and an associate and a reporter at numerous networks. He's been a reporter for ABC, NBC's Today Show, and he's been a primetime #1 rated talk show host on CNBC. It is my privilege to bring to you our special guest today, Bob Berkowitz. Bob, welcome to the program.
Thanks, TJ. How are you, my friend?
Fantastic. Bob, you have been operating at the highest levels of communication through every form of media since the 1970s. What's the biggest surprise that people learn from you when they learn about who you are, what you've done, and they ask, well, how do you be a better communicator?
Yeah, well, people make the foolish assumption that when they say something that's meaningful, something important, something they hope is impactful, that folks on the other end of that communication understand them. And oftentimes there's a lot of misinterpretation. That's why I've always told my clients, it's important for you to translate and interpret what you mean. Follow up any important statement with things like, here's what I mean by that. Here's why I think this is important. Here's how I think this changes things. Here's how I came to this conclusion. So they have, to the best of their ability, a clear picture of what you're talking about. And the opposite is just as true. If you are in the position of listening to somebody, again, you may be making assumptions, again, that you understand what they're saying. It's not just the words that are coming out of their mouth, but the intent. What are they trying to tell you? What are they not telling you? What is their goal in what they're trying to communicate? And so I always believe it's important to ask a lot of questions, not to put them on the spot, not to try to make them feel uncomfortable, but to try to go for clarity. So, when they say something, again, that they consider to be a big deal, say, that's really interesting. What do you mean by that? Or how did you come to that conclusion? Or how can I use that in my life or my business? What is the impact of that? Again, asking a lot of clarifying questions. So to the best of your ability and their ability, you're at least on the same page when it comes to communication. It doesn't mean that you agree with them or disagree with them. It just, at least you have an understanding about what's being said.
Bob, how do you actually convince people to simplify and clarify? Because you've worked on every aspect of communication. Part of what you do now as a communication coach with leaders, especially leaders of institutions. And we all saw recently in the United States, the presidents of several Ivy League schools get up in front of Congress and essentially destroyed their careers, not because of illegality, not because of scandal, but because of poor communication and not being able to simplify important messages. How do you actually convince people to do that? Because there's this impulse of, I need to be technically correct, I need to be legally correct, and lose sight of the overall message that's communicated.
Well, I impart one word to them: empathy. If you were on the other side of this communication, what do you need to hear? And just as importantly, what do you want them to feel? So in the case of those Ivy League college presidents that were testifying before a House committee, what is important for them to know? What is important for moms and dads, for students, for potential people who are going to apply to that college? What do you want them to know? How do you want them to feel? Not about you. They don't really care about you. They care about the college. They care about the institution. So get to those two things. What do you want them to understand with as much clarity as you possibly can deliver? And what do you want them to feel? I feel confident in the University of fill in the blank because they were honest, they were candid, they were truthful about what they said about the situation on their campus, or I wasn't comfortable with them, whatever your feel is. But you should have a goal as the communicator. What is the knowledge that you want to impart, and what is the feeling? Feelings are just as important as knowledge, in my judgment. You can know something about an individual, but your feeling about them, feelings could be: do you trust them? Do you believe them? Do they care about you and others? Those are feelings. You can't quantify those. It's really more of a gut instinct about that individual, what they're saying, and their credibility.
Mm-hmm. Former President Ronald Reagan was known as someone who was great at really connecting at the emotional level. I, of course, read about him. I saw him on TV, but I've never been within 100 miles of him. You've interviewed him. What did he do differently right before that interview started or that press conference started?
Well,
what do you think made him a great communicator?
You used the word a couple of minutes ago, and I think that applies to Reagan. He simplified his thoughts. Doesn't mean they were simplistic, whether you agree with them or disagree with them, but he simplified them. He made them easy to understand for the audience he was trying to reach. In other words, he wasn't in that moment talking to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom or the President of Mexico. He was talking to average American citizens. So he used the kind of language that they would find accessible, understandable. And Reagan had a very easy manner about him when he communicated. He was really comfortable in his own skin. I've never met anybody who is in that position of power who is okay being them. I find a lot of people are not so comfortable being so powerful. It's such a big deal. But Ronald Reagan was comfortable being Ronald Reagan. Just a little aside story, which I think tells you a lot about Reagan as an individual. Traditionally, leaders of corporations or heads of state or leaders in the field, academics, whatever, they're told you should wear, for the men, a dark suit. Pinstripes may be okay. Same thing with women. Dark dress, skirt, and jacket, something very conservative. Well, Reagan would wear a blue blazer with gray slacks, something that's not supposed to be the uniform of the president of the United States, the head of a college, the CEO of a corporation. But he did, because he knew who he was. He knew he was the president, and he knew damn well that everybody else knew that as well. So he was so comfortable in his own skin. He was okay being Ronald Reagan, the way Ronald Reagan wanted to present himself to others. And that's not easy. Most folks, I don't think, are that comfortable with themselves. And I think you really need to say, hey, this is who I am. I have a lot of value to give other people. And I'm going to lean into the value that I can give others, the information, the advice, the guidance that I can help other people with. And if you have that attitude, you're not saying I'm the smartest person in the world or I'm better than anybody else, but I have something of value to give to others. And if you come with that attitude, people will sit and listen to you.
What was it like seeing Reagan communicate in person up close? Because I've heard from members of his staff who said, yeah, he was great at giving a speech like the State of the Union because he would actually work with speech writers and talk to them and have meetings for months and months and go through drafts. But he was also really good at a breaking news moment of just sitting down, chatting with them, getting a few ideas and going with it quickly. I've also heard that he was very careful to not, for example, want to be seen walking up to a lectern like George W. Bush, walking up the script. He wanted his hands to be free, come across natural, so he'd walk up, waving here, waving here. When he got behind the lectern, he'd be waving here without anyone noticing with one hand, pull the 3x5, and I'm not doing it well now. He would pull the 3x5 cards out underneath the lectern, put it down, do that. Then he could glance down at the notes and everything would see seamless. First of all, are the people telling me the truth? And second of all, what techniques did you see? Practical, tactical techniques did you see him use as a communicator?
He was very focused on the messages he wanted to get across to his audience. He was not great on the details. He would leave that to others on his staff, fill in the blanks for me. But he had a strong idea of the vision that he had for the country, or that story of the day. He had a clear idea of where he stood and why he thought it was important for the American people. Again, he would get tripped up on the details a lot. And sometimes he wasn't all that good at ad-libbing. He was much better when he had a script, or, as you said, he did have notes in front of him, which I don't think is a bad thing. I'm not saying this is criticism, TJ, but I'm just saying is that that's the reality. So he sometimes I'd see his people cringe a little bit if he got off.
We begin bombing in 5 minutes, one of his famous sound bites that got him into trouble.
That, but look, you can't kid around about it. He'd forgotten he was in front of a live microphone. Look, Ronald Reagan's been, in front of a camera, in front of microphones for 90% of his life and career. And so he should have known better to say something as kind of foolish as that in front of a live mic. It was unsettling, to say the least.
What was he like as a communicator sitting in the Oval Office meeting with people? Again, I've been told that he would literally look at note cards like, "Good morning, I'm glad you're here." Was he that scripted, or is that just nonsense?
If he knew you, he could even kid around with you, and he'd be pretty good at that. But he wanted to make sure that he got his messages across, and that's important for all of us to remember. It is not the interviewer's responsibility to make sure you get your messages across. It's not the audience's responsibility. It's your responsibility. And no matter what they ask you, you should, of course, answer the question as long as it's reasonable, not crazy or way off the mark. But also make sure you get your messages across there. Again, it's your responsibility to make sure that you tell folks what you think and why it's important to them. Now, one thing, if you look at old videos of Reagan, he'd be, when he was ad-libbing or be asked a question, he often would go, "Well," that was his way of putting things on pause for a moment so he could organize his thoughts and then articulate what was in his brain out of his mouth. And I don't think that's a bad technique for all of us. You don't have to say, "Well," like Reagan did. You can come up with your own.
That's a very good "well," by the way.
Well, I heard that "well" about 1,000,000 times hanging around him. But come up with your own technique. You often don't want to just speak clearly off the top of your head. Some people are great at ad-libbing. Some people are really good at extemporaneously communicating their messages. I think Bill Clinton was really good at it. And I think, honestly, few people get to the office of President of the United States are not good at extemporaneously giving their thoughts, but sometimes they get in trouble doing it. So again,
well, we can't all be Reagan or Clinton, which is one reason why a lot of people like to take Bob Berkowitz courses. Our guest today is the renowned communicator journalist Bob Berkowitz, and he is a very accomplished online instructor. You can get his books. We'll talk about his books in a moment. You can get his online courses on Udemy. Sell it with a story, how to get over your fear of sales, how to give criticism and how to take it, how to make smarter decisions and stop making foolish ones. He's got lots and lots of great courses. And by the way, in full disclosure, some of these we've partnered on. Bob is my partner. We've worked together for many years. He's got the complete sales skills masterclass, the complete career coaching course, the complete management coaching course, how to deal with upset customers. Isn't that nice to know? Who hasn't had an upset customer? I know I have. The complete personal networking course, basic interviewing skills, essential interview skills, and a media training course. Speaking of personal networking, a lot of people like to talk about that, but they don't actually practice it. I can tell you, Bob is someone. The very first way we met, it was 30 years ago. I was down and out. It was one of the lowest points in my career. I was struggling with a failing talk TV show in Florida. And it was kind of modeled after the McLaughlin Group. And I was on 10 networks and it was going nowhere. I was hemorrhaging money. I was scrambling around. How am I going to get out of Florida? Things are pretty tough when you have to leave Florida because of your circumstances. I was looking to leave Florida, looking for a job in TV journalism. I wrote to every kind of famous TV talk show host. I could think of Michael Kinsley, who was hosting Crossfire, others. And I wrote to Bob Berkowitz, who was the #1 talk show host in prime time on CNBC at the time. And wouldn't you know, he called me and said, TJ, I watched your video. I thought you were great. Don't have a job for you. Wanted to say hello. And it put me on a high for weeks. And it's a perfect example of how Bob Berkowitz practices what he preaches. He's always networking, not in some cynical, what can you do for me? Here's my business card way,
Right.
but in a way of just making new friends, connecting with people, sharing information. And I've seen you do that really throughout your career. And is one reason why you're a survivor. You're always off to new things. You're not looking back in the day, other than when someone like me is asking you a question. Tell us a little more about your networking course that people can get on Udemy, but also your philosophy of how to use communication skills to really network effectively. Because so many people bristle at the word networking. They think of the cynical guy at the meeting. Here's my card. What can you do for me? Or they think of LinkedIn being bombarded with, can you sign up for my Zoom call right away? And it rubs people the wrong way. Let's hear about your insights on networking.
You just said it right. Don't go in the attitude, I want you to do something for me. Go with the attitude, what can I do for you? How can I help you? Here's my background. Here are the skills that I have. Here's what I know and what I've done in my life and my career. If there's any way that I can help you, please, let's connect. So you're going, the attitude is that, none of us are perfect. We can all use help in some way. And if you go in there that something that might be helpful to the person that's you're connecting with, that's great. But don't go in there looking, what can you do for me? Or even a quid pro quo. If I help you, you have to help me. If I, wash your back, you have to wash my back. Don't go into that attitude. What can I do to make your life better, your business more successful, your health better, whatever your expertise is, go in with the attitude, what can I do for you? How can I help you? How can I improve things for you?
And so how did you actually use this throughout your life? Because you started off at, I didn't either. You didn't go to Harvard or Yale and the universities that typically fed into the New York Times and that media outlet. And yet you went from talk radio and AP News in Denver to being the White House correspondent at CNN. How did you sort of network your way up through that early career trajectory? Because it was pretty quick and fast, wasn't it?
Well, in the case of CNN, they kind of found me. I was in the Associated Press Radio Network, chief political and Senate correspondent. And somebody at this fledgling, this network that really wasn't on the air. Nobody knew who it was. Nobody knew what it was. I got a call from somebody who said, hi, I'm from the Cable News Network. Okay, what's that? You've ever heard of Ted Turner? I said, of course I've heard of Ted Turner. Well, he's starting a 24-hour all news TV network. Now, this is back in 1980. Nobody had any concept of doing news for 24 hours on television. And he said, we'd like to talk to you. We've seen your work. We like what you do on the air. I was, again, a radio reporter. Could you talk to us? I said, well, this is in the middle of campaign season. I've got to do the New Hampshire primary. I've got to do the Iowa caucuses. I've got to do all these primaries before I get back to Washington. And when I do, I'll be happy to sit down and talk to you. And it was intriguing. What they said to me is, we have a blank canvas. We can make anything we want and create anything we can invent, because we have 24 hours to fill. Now, a lot of people said, oh, they'll never be able to do it.
It was called the Chicken Noodle Network, right?
Chicken Noodle News, exactly. You're 100% right. And people put Ted down and all these things. But we did it. We created something that people take for granted today. In other words, we wouldn't just report on a news conference that Governor so-and-so gave, or Senator Smith or whatever hosted. We would carry it live. It would be news in the raw. Our judgment was that our audience was smart enough to make their own opinions about what Senator so-and-so is saying, or Governor what's-his-name is saying. And now it's done all the time, but then it was brand new. So that was exciting. The other thing also is that as the White House correspondent for CNN, I didn't just do one 3 or 4 minute package for the end of the day, for the evening news, and that's it. I'm done for the day. I can go home and have dinner. No, we were on 24 hours a day. So I was doing live spots from the northwest lawn of the White House every hour or so, on whatever was going on in the White House, whatever the president was doing, whatever any of my sources were saying or thinking or whatever. And we would constantly be updating the audience. We were in effect saying to them, this is important for you to know. This is something new. We were really filling the mandate of news. This is something that's brand new that you should know about.
What was one of the stories you were proudest of having done back then?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I loved election coverage. It was, to me, covering the Reagan campaign in 1980 was really interesting to me. I learned a lot. But my boss at the time at CNN came up with an interesting idea. I was the correspondent covering Reagan, and a colleague of mine was covering Jimmy Carter, President Carter. And so he said, for 2 weeks, we want you guys to switch roles. So I had the job of covering Carter, and he had the job of covering Reagan. And I think it gave me a lot of perspective on the campaign that I was really assigned to, and I was covering Reagan. I saw the other side. I heard their point of view and what their strategy was, what their goals were, the way that they were connecting with the American people. And so I thought that was interesting. The other thing also, I loved covering the debates between Carter and Reagan. They were fascinating to me. Reagan was a master at that. He really was terrific at that. And just the initial parts of his presidency, the painful part was covering.
Were you there for the primary debates where I paid for this microphone, Mr. Green?
Yes, I was. President George H.W. Bush said that. Talk about trying to control the narrative. You went a little too far trying to control the narrative. But I was there when Reagan was shot. And
so what was that day like?
Well, I'll tell you the way my day started. That morning at the White House, I was sitting in Jim Brady's office, and I'd known Brady for years. And I had my feet up in his desk. He had his feet up in his desk. We were trading insults as we had done for God knows how many years, and kidding around and fooling around and all that. And then about 4 or 5 hours later, I saw Jim Brady on the sidewalk outside the Hilton Hotel with blood gushing out of his head. And that to me was more painful and shocking than anything, because I really wasn't sure whether Reagan was shot. Reagan was shot, of course, but he was shoved in his limousine so fast, none of us could see what happened. The shooter was behind us. John Hinckley was standing behind us where we were and shot from there. But Jim and the Secret Service agent were clearly wounded. There was no question about that. And so we were just trying to get information. So I went to my sources within the Reagan presidency, and I said, what's going on with the president? Was he shot? And the only message that they would say to me, the president is all right. I didn't ask whether he's all right or not. Was he shot? The president is all right. They kept repeating that over and over again. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, he's on his way to George Washington Hospital. And I found this out because I found some sources within the hospital. Excuse me. They said when Reagan walked in, he was on like that with 2 Secret Service agents. They were propping him up. And suddenly he walked about 2 feet in. Excuse me. Pardon me. And he fainted.
He collapsed, right?
He collapsed. He fainted. He was losing blood. What they also found out was that the bullet that entered his chest, if it was a half inch over to one side, would have killed him instantly. He was that fortunate in the way that he lived, he survived, and went out to be
a lucky break in an obviously unlucky situation to have someone trying to assassinate you. In a moment, I want to hear more about how you got from the White House, which is a pretty plum position for any reporter, even if it's a new network, all the way to being a primetime host. But first, we're going to pay some bills here and try to help a lot of people as well. Bob, when was the book published? And tell us about its origin and how it's continued to be of interest to people around the globe, decades later.
1971. And I have to tell you, TJ, at first, it was a self-published book. But my father and my stepmother, who wrote it with him and was in practice with him and was his life partner and marriage partner, they had a lot of celebrity patients, very famous people at the time. And they would go on the Tonight Show or the Today Show or any of the Phil Donahue, any of the programs of the day, and talk about how this book changed their lives, how it really helped them to become the person who they are today. And the book took off, and Random House, major publishing house, bought the book, and then they really took it to the next level, and it sold millions and millions of copies. And you're right, TJ, to this very day, it still sells because the messages that my father and stepmother said at the time still hold today. They are meaningful. Now, my wife, Susan Yeager, and myself, we updated the book to make it more relevant for the age that we're living in now. But the essential messages, the beliefs are theirs, and they are definitely still in the book.
And it's a short book. I recommend it as a read. I've bought it. I've recommended it to friends as well. It is still relevant, even though we're talking about 53 years later. People are still reading it. It's a relatively simple message, and yet one that gets lost in so much personal development movement. It's all about, if you don't get up at 5 a.m., you're a lazy, useless person. If you don't run marathons 3 days a week, it's over. You're a fat slob. I mean, there's so much of the personal development movement that is all about, you have to do this, follow this checklist, or you're doomed for failure. And your father and your stepmother were exactly right. You do have to love yourself. You do have to be your own best friend. And occasionally I'm even guilty of this. I'm out on the pickleball court and I hit a blunder. I don't instantly think, oh, I just need to hit the ball in the middle, keep your eye on it. My first thought, and it's quite often articulated quite loudly, is, you moron. Well, that's not really a good response to have.
Okay, is that touches on a very important example. If we make a mistake, we're going to have the same reaction you did. You incompetent dope, you idiot. You can't do anything right. But if we do something well, our ability to praise ourselves is minuscule compared to the amount of energy and volume and emotions that we give to when we mess up. So at least give equal time to when you do something well. At least take the moment and say, bathe yourself in self-congratulatory. Now, some people say, well, isn't that being narcissistic? Isn't that being egomaniac? No, it's being good to yourself. And if you're not good to yourself, then how can you expect anybody else to be that way to you too? It really is about your own best friend.
Yeah. I do have to ask one question, because I famously remember, remember famously that someone someone asked Wayne Dyer's daughter, like, did you know your dad wrote a best-selling book about how to be a good parent? And he talks about, and she couldn't stop laughing for 24 hours. What's it like being, at this point, a young man, and everyone else in the world says, your parents have everything together. It's very hard to be a personal development guru to a family member. What was that like growing up in an environment like this?
They were parents first, and shrinks second. I mean, if I messed up, they would talk to me like a parent would talk to a kid and say, "What the hell were you thinking when you did that? Why did you do that for?" But they really were very kind as well. They would, if I did something well or my siblings did something well, they would say, "Great job. Really, I'm so proud of you. I really am." Again, so many parents, the volume when the kid messes up is so much louder than when the kid does something really well. And again, you have to give credit to your kid as much as you do, criticism, but criticize in a way that doesn't make them feel badly about themselves. We all make mistakes, but to berate yourself, to beat yourself up for that mistake does you no good, and it doesn't do anybody else any good either.
And there are other books we have to talk about, but check out this book. Again, whether you are looking to improve your own personal development, or maybe you have a sense of the history, you want to get a better sense of the history of the personal development movement, I do recommend the book, How to Be Your Own Best Friend. And mine is right over here with all sorts of markings and underlines that I've used in developing my own personal development courses as well. So it's been instrumental. Now, because of your background in communication and a lot of the spotlight of some of your talk shows, you're also the author of Why Men Stop Having Sex and What You Can Do About It. You co-authored this with your wife, along with the book, What Men Won't Tell You, But Women Need to Know. So if you can talk about those books and share with our, we're also getting some comments. Rick says, not sure if you're taking questions. Yes, we are taking questions. And Rick, we'll come to your question in just a moment, but we've put on the carousel now, for those of you watching Amazon Live, Bob's books that he has written and co-authored with Susan Yeager, Why Men Stop Having Sex and What You Can Do About It, and What Men Won't Tell You, But Women Need to Know. Tell us about your insights in these books.
A little bit of history. I was, as you said, a White House correspondent. I was a political reporter. But I wanted to do something that I wanted to do kind of journalism would mean a lot to me personally that no one else was doing in the world, and that is to report about men. This is in an era, many years ago, when there was a lot of very good journalism about women. There were so many magazines that were devoted to women, so many articles about the struggles that women were having and the challenges.
McCall's Red Book, Betty Friedan.
All good stuff, but very little about men. If some men were silently suffering, or they didn't feel comfortable about who they were or what was going on in their lives, they had a hard time communicating their feelings, much less anything else that was important. And so I wanted to write a book about men and about what was going on inside of them that they were not talking about. And so it was a successful book, and it led to a great gig. I was the men's correspondent on the Today Show at NBC News for many, many years. And because, again, the 2/3 of the audience for the Today Show are female. And the audience for information about men are women. Women are curious about men because men say nothing. If you ask a man about his feelings or what's going on in his heart or his head or whatever, you might as well be talking to a blank wall. And so I wanted to be the translator, the conveyor of information about what was going on with guys that was important for women to understand. The book about, it had a couple of titles. He's not up for it. He's just not up for it anymore, which is about, again, men who were not having sex within the context of their marriage. This is a huge problem. Some men shut down. Some of them are depressed and they won't deal with it. Some of them are on medication for depression or anxiety, and it inhibits their sexuality. But they're so embarrassed and so ashamed of it, they won't even talk to their wives or a therapist or their doctors about it. And so again, I wanted to shine some light on this very important subject. Women were blaming themselves. Oh, he must dislike me. He must find me unattractive. He must secretly hate me. Whatever. It wasn't true. There are many reasons why men lose interest in sex. And again, it happens that I think in about 40% of the marriages, these guys just shut down. And so I was trying to give some ideas and some information for these women about how they can help their men cope with this and maybe get some help and try to mend the marriage in a very positive way.
What are your thoughts on books like Think and Grow Rich, which is also one of the seminal books of the personal development movement?
One of the classics. Napoleon Hill understood, what are we talking about, 80 years ago, at least, the principles of being successful, not just financially successful, but successful as a person, successful as a parent, a partner, whatever. He really understood that. It really, you used the right term. It's the seminal book. It is, you know, you want to talk about self-help. It is the grandfather, great-grandfather of self-help. I suggest everyone read it. There are a lot of great books out there, but that's the one to start with.
So, Bob, you were the correspondent for covering men's issues for the Today Show, and you were able to talk about concerns of men from a man's perspective. What are your thoughts on what's going on right now in the so-called manosphere? You have all of these thought leaders. I'm being generous saying thought, but sure, they're thought leaders. Whether it is Andrew Tate, whether it's Jordan Peterson, and they all the most popular people who proclaim to talk about men seem to be doing so from a very right-wing ideological perspective, and to be doing it in a way that many interpret is very misogynistic. Is that just the way the internet is going to work? Is there a way around that, or am I somehow missing other great thought leaders?
Well, I don't know if the other great thought leaders are getting the attention of people like Jordan Peterson and folks like that. I'm about the business of bringing people together. They seem to be more interested in dividing us or keeping us apart. That said, there was a fairly extensive period in not so distant American history where men were the punchlines, the punching bags of every joke, every woman. And I think men started to feel badly about themselves. They started to feel, well, you know, I can't be a part of this couple. I can't be a part of this society if all you're telling me is that I'm incompetent or this or that. And I think that a lot of men felt quite alienated. And Jordan Peterson understood that and keyed in on that. I don't think what his messaging was what I would subscribe to. Again, I'm about bringing people together. I want men and women, or men and men, or women and women, or whatever, to connect, to be loving towards each other. And he seemed to want to, you know, he has more of an attitude of one should feel superior to the other. That's not me. And I don't think that's where we're at right now. But I think there was a period where men were being constantly put down. That's why I wanted to be the men's correspondent for the Today Show, because I wanted to show the depth and the range of the male experience. It's not just some macho chest beating guys or whatever, or professional athletes. They're guys who have all kinds of issues, all kinds of challenges, goals, aspirations that, again, they don't have necessarily the skills or even the permission to talk about them. So I wanted to be their reporter, their interpreter, their communicator for them.
Right. Now let's shift gears, Bob, because you've been a top-rated talk show host on cable TV, network TV, and this was at a time before the internet. Now, a lot of our audience is so young. What are you talking about? But this was a time when that made you really, really famous. Maybe not as famous as Ronald Reagan or Barbara Streisand, but pretty famous. So I want to hear your journey. How did you go from, okay, being a successful reporter, and CNN was a nice gig, but how do you go from there to getting your own primetime show on cable network TV? Because it can't just be good communication skills. It can't be just good networking skills. You got political skills. I'm assuming some luck, some timing. Walk us through that journey as to how you got that plum position.
Well, I think the number one attribute of a good interviewer or talk show host is an insatiable curiosity of others, what they do, what they think, what their life outlook is. And I have that. I've always been interested in what others think and how they see the world. Maybe I can learn something from them, and I want to help them by my questions to communicate that to my audience. So that's number one. Number two, I was, as I said before, the men's correspondent for the Today Show. And then, for reasons that I'm still not sure why, I became a talk show host in the Financial News Network. Now, TJ, I'm pretty good at a lot of things, but finances is not one of them. But I'm a good interviewer. I know ask the right questions. And so they hired me to be the talk show host on the Financial News
And if
Network.
we could just point out for people who've never heard of the Financial News Network, I mean, there was a time when there was no internet.
Right.
You had cable TV, and
Right.
you had a few dozen channels. Financial News Network was one of them, and it was a pretty big deal in its time.
And it was the predecessor of CNBC. Again, it focused on the stock market, it focused on how to make more money, how to be more successful in business, how to make your small business into a bigger business, things like that. All good. All good. So I did that for a while, and a guy named Andy Friendly approached me. His dad was Fred Friendly, who was one of the great pioneers of television. And Andy was doing very well on TV too. And he said, I've been asked to run CNBC, which is now an all business network, but then it was business during the day. And at night, the primetime shows were more general talk. And so he said, we want you to be a talk show host at night for CNBC. But you were the men's correspondent for the Today Show. We want you to host a show about sex. I said, well, that's kind of interesting. Okay, let's talk about it. You know, it's the one subject we all have A, an opinion on, B, some experience in doing, and maybe some confusion. Maybe we don't have enough information. Maybe we're anxious about it. And so if we had a nightly discussion, an honest, open discussion about a subject that's important to all of us, you know, we didn't get here by FedEx. We got here because of sex. Then we could do a show, and we did it. We did not do any sensationalism. We did not do it off color or making fun of anybody's sexuality. We did it with respect to any of the people that came on our show and for the audience. And it worked. It was a very successful show.
And I don't know if I've ever asked you this, and I apologize. It's going to make me sound superficial and tawdry maybe, but I just have to ask, when you're doing a show about sex in prime time, back in the day when people only had a handful of channels of what to watch and there's no internet, I'm just wondering, if you traveled somewhere to give a speech, did you all of a sudden have, like, 8 ladies tossing you their hotel keys? It seems like it would have brought out a lot of attention because of the subject matter. And again, your perceived area of expertise on that matter. How did that change how people related to you?
Yeah, that did not happen. No woman propositioned me or gave me her hotel key or anything like that. My wife and I once were walking through a department store in New York City, and a woman came up to me and says, so Bob, how's your sex life? And I guess she was trying to be funny, and I just sort of brushed it off. But it was most 99% of the people that came up to me were respectful and complimentary, not so much to me, but for the show and the way I think we treated the subject matter and the respect we had for the guests. For example, nobody in mainstream media was talking about gay folks. Nobody was talking about being gay. And we did. And even a more sensitive subject was being young and gay, being on a college campus. We had some gay students from the University of Oklahoma. Now, this is a long time ago, where it was not the most comfortable thing in the world to be out at a school like the University of Oklahoma. Today, it's no big deal for them. But in those days, it was not a comfortable thing. And being gay in college was not widely accepted. And so we wanted to say, hey, these are our fellow human beings. And in their case, our fellow Americans. They're just trying to get through life. They just happen to have a different feeling about sexuality than the rest of us do. But other than that, they're just like everybody else. Maybe they're concerned about money, careers, where they're going to live, their health, whatever. They just, their interest in sex is different than other folks. They're not better, they're not worse, they're just different. And their feelings and their attitude and their lifestyle and their choices should be respected.
We're speaking about Berkowitz, a renowned talk show host, journalist, and communications consultant who continues to work and train top leaders of academia, the business world, and the political world. Bob, you've interviewed thousands of people. Tell me about an interview you just enjoyed the most, that you feel like you really got something out of it. And also tell me about sort of the worst interview you ever did.
Oh, God.
Or one of the worst.
I did a lot of really bad interviews, TJ. There couldn't be a worst of the worst, but I'm sure I did a lot of rotten interviews. Again, I was, when we did Real Personal, I guess the most interesting interviews I did with regular people talking about their sex lives. That to me was more fascinating in many ways than talking with the experts or the leaders or whatever. That's important to talk to them too, don't get me wrong. But to have everyday Joes and Marys and Johns and Lucys talk about the most intimate part of their lives with honesty and candor and authenticity and realness, to me was so gratifying. And I think affirming for the audience out there. A lot of folks say, oh gosh, I thought I was the only person in the world who had those thoughts, those fantasies, or whatever. And say, no, there are other people just like you out there. And again, there was nothing exceptional about these people. They could, one thing was a little funny to me. I was interviewing this couple who were into swinging. In other words, they consensually have sex with other couples. Okay, you can think that's good, you can think it's bad, but that's what they did. They were honest with each other. And I said, they were from, I think, North Dakota. And I said, so, what's your future look like? Oh, from here, we're going to go to Philadelphia for the Republican National Convention, where we're going to vote for Ronald Reagan for president. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Again, it's so easy for us to stereotype people based on their private life or their personal interests. And you can't. You never know where somebody's coming from. Everybody puts up a facade for public consumption, and that's fine. But underneath that, who knows what they think? Who knows what they feel? Who knows what they do behind closed doors? One never knows.
Yeah. And any interviews you feel like, oh, I didn't do that very well. I remember you telling me about your interview, for example, with Jane Fonda, but any others you want to share with?
Jane Fonda, then she was still a gorgeous woman, and I think a very talented actress. But when I interviewed her, I had a local talk show in Denver, and she was in Denver. This is back in the 70s to protest the war in Vietnam. Big anti-war parade was happening in Denver in those days. And I don't know if intimidated is the right word, but I was in awe of her. And again, she was stunningly beautiful. And she still is. That woman near 90 now or something. She still is just incredibly beautiful.
But this wasn't that far away from her Barbarella days, which was a big deal.
Yeah, she was a very big deal. So I said, well, Miss Fonda, what do you think of, and I forgot what the question was, blah, 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 blah. And she paused. She looked at me and she started laughing uncontrollably. I thought I had asked the most innocuous, innocent question in the world. And finally, she controlled herself. I said, what did I say that was so funny? She said, you realize what you called me? I said, no, you called me Miss Fondle. I said, well, I can understand why I said
a little Freudian slip there. Yes.
No, that's okay. That's all right. And so years later, I was at a party in Beverly Hills, and her then husband, Tom Hayden, was at this party. And I introduced myself. He says, I know who you are. You're the Jane Fonda guy. I said, yes. And I said, he says, well, we've gone to lunch on that story many, many times. And I said, well, but it was embarrassing for me.
That does bring up an issue, because I do know a lot of people who were famous talk show hosts, And you can just tell when they're out, they're still kind of hoping, well, I hope someone recognizes me. And I hope so. They're living in the past, and they like that level of fame. They like being able to talk about the Hollywood parties. You've always struck me as someone really grounded and living in the present and the future. What have you done that's different from others? Because I know
Well,
you've seen people, and you have famous friends where they're just fixated on the past.
yeah, when I was on television every night, yeah, people would stop me on the street and tell me how much they liked the show or whatever they wanted to say. That was perfectly fine. It was fine. It was fine. As I said, 99.9% of the people couldn't have been nicer, couldn't have been more gracious, and it was just a terrific experience. And if once in a while somebody didn't like it, fine, that's okay. I could brush that off. But I didn't care. If no one recognized me, it didn't bother me one whit. And right now, believe me, I walk in the middle of New York City, people aren't stopping me anymore, which is fine. I'm okay with that. It's the people. You're right. There are those people who are like fame junkies. They can't get enough of that adulation, that attention, that, oh gosh, you're so wonderful, you're so famous and all. I don't care. It's okay with me. If they recognize me, it's fine. If they don't recognize me, it's fine. I don't care either way.
Mm-hmm. We live in an era now where everybody's a talk show host, it seems like. I mean, you were in an era where it was really a special thing. It's like, oh my God, if I don't have a master's degree from the Columbia School of Journalism, or if my dad doesn't own a network, or I'm not already a really famous comedian like Johnny Carson, I can't even aspire to that. Now, everyone can be a podcast host. Everyone can go live on Facebook. Yep. What advice do you have for people who want to just not just show up and do the ordinary things? And what pet peeves do you have? I know I can't stand it when I see a podcast host or a YouTube host start off the show with, okay, Bob, introduce yourself and tell our audience about you.
Well, that's peeve number one in my book too, TJ. Do your homework on this person. It's much easier now than it was in the day when I was hosting a talk show host. You've got Google, you've got all kinds of search engines. Find out as much as you can about this person. Find out something that's really interesting about them, some interest that they have, a hobby, whatever, that few people know about and why they should care. And it's not just the question you ask, it's the follow-up question. So in other words, really, really listen to their answer. If you're not sure what they mean by that, well, the audience is probably with you. They're not sure either what the guy said. So follow it up with, gee, that's really interesting. Can you give me an example of what you're talking about? Because I'm not clear about what you're trying to say here. So do your homework, really, really listen. Ask not only smart questions, it's okay to have a list of questions you want to ask, but just don't go down the list. Ask the question, listen to the answer, and ask smart follow-up questions, clarifying questions, whatever you think is important, not only for you, but in essence, you're an advocate for the audience. You're in a position to ask the questions that maybe they are, maybe they aren't, who knows? But certainly ask a lot of questions, a lot of follow-up questions, and use your own sense of curiosity. As I said to you earlier, TJ, a good talk show host, a good interview has an insatiable interest in finding out how come, why, how did you do this? What was your path to? You've done that here in our discussion. What was my path to getting where I am today? It's smart. It's a good way of doing it. You want to find out what the process was like. How did I do it? Why did I do it? Why did anybody choose me? Things like that. And I think if you want to be a talk show host, you have to have that attitude. It's not about you. It's about them, and it's about the audience. I heard a famous interviewer the other day ask a question of somebody he was interviewing. I swear, TJ, the question went on for about 4 minutes. So then it wasn't about really finding out something. It was about showing the audience how smart this person. The audience knows you're smart. They're already bought into that. That's baked into the cake. But ask smart, interesting, incisive questions that are going to bring something new out of this individual, not the same old, same old.
Now, you've worked closely with Barbara Walters and a lot of other top journalists. What interviewers have you really admired and enjoyed and respected the most in your career that you've worked with?
Well, Barbara Walters was great. I mean, she would again, she was a great listener. She really listened to, and you couldn't get away with anything with Barbara. If you said something that didn't ring true to her, or just set off an alarm bell in her, she would really go to town, and she'd really follow up and make sure she understood you. She was great. Phil Donahue was great. Brian Gumbel is one of the best interviewers I've ever seen. I think he would agree. He was not maybe the friendliest person in the world. He wasn't the most accessible person. You couldn't, if you came up to him and say, "Oh, I love you, I love you, I think you're the greatest," he'd say thank you and move on. But he was really good at what he did. Really good. Jane Pauley was great. I worked with her. So these are people I admired. I worked with and admired. Dick Cavett, great too, and he's funny. Dick was smart, funny, and interesting.
He has a classic. I remember once at a party, and I happened to be dating someone who just lived in his building, and she had told him that, "Oh, my friend likes you." So he didn't have to do this, but just as a favor to her, she had a big party. There's 100 people there. He walks in, and he comes up to me and says, "TJ, you made it." Everyone's like, "Why is this famous celebrity happy that TJ is here?"
Nice.
It was just kind of a funny little joke that he did from time to time. But here I am talking about it and remembering it and coming away with the sense that he was a class act. So he was great. Bob, I know you're always someone.
Well, really are good listeners. If you come up to them and you say, "This is," I want to tell you the experience I had of something that I think it's relevant to your topic or your background. People who really listen to you, I think it's important. I think it's important for all of us to be good listeners, whether we're talk show hosts or just individuals. Be a good listener. Really, I think too often, TJ, I don't know how you feel about this. When people are listening to somebody speak, they're formulating in their head, "Oh, what should I say? What's my response? What's my funny anecdote or story that I should tell?" No, just shut up and listen. And then it's appropriate to react or to give your take on it, or your background, or your thoughts on it. But first thing is, shut up and listen.
Great sage advice. I want to listen to you for a moment on what you see the future, and none of us are Nostradamus, but what's the future of media? Because I think you share my concern, a lot of people's concerns, that we live in a world where it's very, very easy to have lies spread and lies believed. And anyone who is trying to make a rational argument, a fact-based argument, is set up to lose. We live in a world of fake news, of propaganda put out by state actors. And this is not a political show, and we have people across the spectrum. I don't mean to get involved with politics, but we do have a situation now, for example, where by almost every objective measure, the United States economy is better than it's ever been.
Yep.
And yet we have an incumbent president. I'm not going to talk about the political race. We have an incumbent president that if he says, "Hey, the economy is going well," he's instantly attacked, called he's basically insane, and it's almost impossible for him to communicate positive messages. How do you see political figures being able to operate in this environment, and what do you see as the solution?
Well, I can't. When you were speaking, I was thinking about social media, which in many ways is good. It really you can get across a lot of good ideas and interesting insights, products, thoughts, beliefs, whatever. But the downside of social media is there is no editor. There's nobody at the top and saying, "You sure you want to say that?" Or how do you backing up what you're saying? Or what are your sources or anything like that? It's just, if anybody has something to say, anybody has an opinion, blah, they can put it out there. And I think there's something concerning about that. That they sound sort of factoids that are out there that really aren't facts. They really are not backed up by anything important. And I think that is the one concern I have about the future of media, is that there's going to be I like the idea that things are unfiltered, that people can speak their minds. That's good. But if they're putting out stuff that they are trying to present as facts without any basis for it, that's concerning to me. That is very concerning to me.
And we do have that. I mean, we've got not just Alex Jones, but there's 1,000,001 followers of Alex Jones and
Yeah.
copycats who just say, hey, I can get ratings if I just say something that factually happened, didn't happen. It was just a bunch of actors putting on a show to manipulate you. There's always a market for conspiracy theories.
And the outrageous gets attention. Whether it's fact-based or not, be damned. But the more outrageous you are, the more colorful you are, the more likely it is you're going to get what you so deeply hunger for, and that's attention.
Yeah.
Not credibility, but attention, which I find interesting.
And that's obviously not a new phenomenon. I mean, there's always been nastiness in politics. I'm wondering where you put your finger on the origin. To me, it was Newt Gingrich who really weaponized language in the mid-90s, who says to his candidates, okay, you're not going to say you disagree with your opponent's taxation policy of 30% versus 32%. No, you're going to say that your political opponent is sick, is depraved, is un-American, is unpatriotic. To me, that was sort of the beginning of where we are now, where family members can't speak to each other, and people can't even imagine how someone on another side can consider themselves an American. And it's certainly not just happening. We're seeing it in Canada. We're seeing it in every major democracy.
Well, my political days, Ronald Reagan was the president. Thomas Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Reagan was a conservative Republican. Tip O'Neill was an old line liberal Democrat. And they agreed on very little. Both loved the United States. And they would argue and they would disagree. But at the end of the day, Reagan would invite him over to have a drink at the White House, and O'Neill happily joined him. And they could disagree. They could disagree without being disagreeable. I was a Senate correspondent for the Associated Press, and I would witness some really heated arguments on the floor of the United States Senate between a Democrat and a Republican. I mean, they were heated. They weren't, they weren't toned down or anything like that. But at the end of the day, they'd walk off the floor arm in arm and go back into one of the ante rooms there and share a cocktail. So they were saying, we can disagree with each other. That's fine. We can have our principles that are different. That's fine. But it wasn't personal. Today, you're right, TJ. It is personal. Trump and his followers with a lock her up for Hillary Clinton, they're still doing that. Hillary Clinton's not running for anything anymore. Just the other day, they were saying, lock her up, lock her. Hey, she's yesterday's news. You have nothing better to talk about than a politician who's no longer on the public scene by saying, lock her up? It was just ridiculous. The other thing also is that we need to hold politicians and business leaders accountable for what they claim or what they say. If you're allowed to give your opinions, but if it's contradictory to what you said a year ago, 6 months ago, 6 days ago, you need to be held to account. You need to be saying, hey, that's not what you said then. And that's one of the good things about media today, is that we have a record of what folks said in the past and how it may be radically different to what they're putting out today.
Well, there's a record, but is there accountability? Because, I mean, when Ronald Reagan was running for president, he was, for those of our viewers in other countries are young, he was considered very much to the right of center in the political spectrum.
Yes.
And yet he could only communicate to voters filtered through the prism of the so-called mainstream media, CBS, NBC, CNN, the Washington Times. And it worked out pretty well for him. He won in a landslide.
Very well.
Nowadays, you can say whatever you want. There's going to be some media, and it may even be your own media, with your own podcast, your own YouTube, your own blog, where you can directly reach people, and there is no one else holding you accountable. We're seeing this again, not just in the United States, all over the world. And so what is going to hold people accountable? Because it certainly looks like we're seeing fragmentation in democracies around the world. And increasingly, a lot of people are coming to the conclusion, and this is one of the times when I say it is both sides. There's a lot of people on both sides coming to the conclusion that democracy just can't work if people on the other side don't believe in it. And maybe we do have to try something else. That's troubling, I think, for anyone who A, believes in democracy, B, believes in sort of a broader liberal spirited society where free ideas float and the best ideas win out.
I think, TJ, the vast majority of us have our own BS meter. We know when a politician or a leader in business is saying something that just smells, it just doesn't sound truthful. And we don't need anybody else to tell us that. We just know in our gut and our heart and our experience and our minds and our thinking and our education that what they're saying just doesn't ring true. And I think that's holding somebody accountable. You may not, maybe the New York Times does it, or CNN or BBC, whomever, they hold politicians accountable. And that's great. They should. But I think on a personal level, people say, you know what? This doesn't sound right to me. I don't know what they're trying to say or what they're trying to sell or what they're trying to pawn off on us. It's just not true from my personal experiences in life and work and business, etc.
Yeah. But by the standards of your family and your own father, you're about, halfway through your career. Tell us about how you and members of your family live long and are really vital for 6, 7, 8, 9 decades.
Well, they didn't. My dad lived to, and he lived a great life. He was also mentally sharp, well into his 90s. Towards the end there, he was losing a few miles an hour off his fastball, but he was in great shape. My mom and my brother died very young. My brother died in his 50s. My mom died in her 60s. Even though my mother had tremendous long living heredity in her family, but both my mom and my brother smoked, and that really cut their lives short. And I've done a lot of dumb things in my life. That's one of the things I haven't done. I never smoked. And my wife is a professor of food studies and nutrition at New York University, and so I eat very well. She watches carefully what I eat. Both of us exercise every day, and while there are no guarantees, I expect to live like my dad a long time, and I hope I'm as sharp as he was toward the end of his life as I hope to be.
Let's give us, one of the beauties of this is we're not a network TV show with Jack Welch or Rupert Murdoch or Roger Ailes saying, hey, sell more commercials and get quick. We do have time. I want to take a few more minutes of your time. What do you eat? How do you exercise? What kind of meditation do you do? People say, I want to be like a Bob Berkowitz and vital, not for 1 or 2 or 3 decades, but for many, many decades.
Yeah, I do meditate twice a day, 20 minutes. I follow transcendental meditation. There are many other meditations out there. If they work for you, great. TM has worked for me. I've been doing it since I was in my early 20s. So it's been a lot of decades I've been doing TM. What I find about TM is that it both calms me down and energizes me at the same time. So in other words, if I'm kind of stressed out and I've had a rough day, TM evens the waves, evens the keel for me, and it's great. Or if I'm kind of tired, if I'm having a really rough day or I didn't sleep well the night before, TM energizes me in a positive way. And I don't feel jittery or all psyched up or ready to take on the world. Just in a very calm way, I have a lot of energy. So I do that twice a day for 20 minutes. And I've done it for, as I said, well over 50 years. So I'm pretty happy about that. I'm not a vegetarian, but I don't eat a lot of meat. I eat some fish, I eat some poultry, but a lot of plant-based food is in my diet. Again, my wife's a great cook. I'm fortunate about that. So I do that. I drink 1 glass of wine a night. Occasionally, on rare occasions, 2 glasses, but that's a rarity. I don't go more than that. When I was much younger, I would drink more than that, but I'm older now, and so I limit my drinking. I don't do any narcotics, don't do any drugs. I don't even have any prescription drugs in my body. In fact, my dad, at the end of his life, he was not taking 1 prescription drug.
Wow.
I hope that I have the kind of health that he enjoyed throughout his life. I keep active. I am a voracious reader of good information. I read 4 or 5 newspapers a day, websites or newspapers. I'm always working, reading a novel. I like to write my thoughts, my feelings, my insights, my beliefs, even if it's for nobody else but me. I like doing that. I keep in
Now, did
touch.
you call that journaling or your
Yeah,
memoirs? What do you call that?
all journaling. That's whatever you want to call it. That's fine. Doesn't matter to me. I keep in touch with friends, like you and I have been friends for decades. I keep in touch. There's always, I come with the attitude, something I can learn from somebody else. And so, God knows I've learned a lot from you, TJ. You're a master communicator. You're a great entrepreneur. You're smart in a lot of ways. And so I've learned a lot from you. I've watched you and see how you move through the world. And I think it's great. So, again, I always think this something, what can I learn today? What can I learn? That starts my day, and that information, that insight, that new way of looking at the world, at people, I find fascinating, TJ, and it keeps me interested in being alive.
Great. It occurs to me, I forgot to do something, extend you a privilege that we extend all of our guests here, which is so many programs, websites, blogs say, no promotion, no self-promotion, don't sell. We actually encourage people to speak with confidence, promoting the thing they're most passionate about. So what I like to do is to give all of our guests a couple of minutes to promote whatever it is they want to promote, their consulting practice, their trainings, their workshops, their books, their Udemy courses, and to do it unfiltered, unprompted. So I want to sort of close out. This will be and I will let you go. I appreciate your time, but I want to give you a couple of minutes to promote your consulting, your training practice, your course, anything you want. I'm even going to take myself off the screen for a minute and let you talk for a couple of minutes. So ready, set, and go.
Well, first of all, thank you, TJ, for the privilege of your time. I really appreciate it. If you want to contact me for either consulting, or you have some ideas or thoughts or feelings or whatever, you want some guidance from me, please email me, Bob Berkowitz1 at Gmail. Bob Berkowitz, BOBBERKOWITZ, followed by the number 1 at Gmail. And I promise I read everything that comes my way. I will answer you to the best of my ability and give you the best guidance, advice that I can possibly give you. Or if you want to hire me for consulting or give you some support in some way, I'm happy to do that as well. TJ mentioned Udemy. Go to Udemy. I have several courses that are about communicating your ideas, how to get your messages across to the audience that you're trying to reach, whether it's in business or whether it's in your personal life. We all need to be better at communicating, to getting our ideas, our feelings, our insights, our beliefs across to those we are trying to reach. So that's about it. I've got some books. If you go to Amazon or whatever your favorite book site is and just put in the name Bob Berkowitz, you'll see all the books that I've written. And if any of them appeal to you, I'd be honored if you'd read them. Again, I'm open to your questions, your comments, your thoughts. So again, email me at bobberkowitz1 at gmail.com. Thanks, TJ.
Great, Bob. Thank you so much. Promise. Okay, what I like to do is sort of like the end of movie critics movies. They show the outtakes and things. Anything you wish we would have done differently? Anything you really wish you'd said in this interview? Because we can talk about it and pull it.
Probably there is. I'm sure I didn't articulate to the best of my ability, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I hope I got across to folks what I think and what I feel.
Because I'm still. It's been a long time since I did a daily show, so I still feel like I'm rusty at interviewing people. And I know you don't want to trash me, obviously, but any tips you have on how I can be a better talk show host and a better interviewer?
I think you're just terrific. I think you've got, again, great insight. Just bring your experiences, your what you've done to the table as well. Don't hesitate to do that because you've had a storied career. I remember you once telling me a story. I said, wow, that's amazing. There was a politician, obviously from overseas, who wanted to give a speech to his people in his language. And he wanted you to watch the speech on tape. And you did, and you gave him your attention. You didn't understand his language, but you understood the feeling that he was getting across, the emphasis, the emotion, the energy, the enthusiasm. And I think you gave him some very good, sage advice. To me, that is one of the greatest stories I've ever heard about communication consulting, is that you didn't know the language, but you understood the feeling, the energy, the enthusiasm, the passion, or the lack of it. And I
Well,
think
it was the lack of, because this is what he was
yeah,
reading. I had to tell him, "You're boring as hell." That was the issue. But I'm glad you remembered it,
I'll
because
never forget that.
that's the ultimate test of a story. Do people
Yeah.
remember it and take away some positive message?
Well, that's the one thing I do believe in, is storytelling, because I think the benefit of story, first of all, explains what you mean very well. And two, stories are memorable. They stick to the brain. There's stories that you and I were told as kids that we can still remember to this very day, low decades later. So I think if you could get your points across in the form of a story, a narrative, I think it can be very, very effective for you and for the person who's listening.
Mm-hmm. Good points. All right, Bob. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Talk to you soon.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.